On a scale from 1 to 10, how easy is it for you to focus without reaching for your phone? If your answer wasn't a 10, you're not alone. 2025 studies show the average person checks their phone about 96 times a day. That constant switching splinters attention and makes it harder to stay present with anything important. In this video, I'll share 5 science-backed mindset shifts: mental contrasting, if-then plans, habit stacking, energy management, and flow hacks that make productivity feel natural instead of forced. But first, we need to understand why the old model of working harder set so many people up to fail. Why hustle culture fails in 2025. Hustle culture promised that endless grinding would unlock success, but its track record tells another story. For years, people were told that sacrificing sleep, filling every spare moment with work, and collapsing at their keyboards meant they were serious about their goals. On the surface, that looked like dedication. In reality, it built cycles of stress, fatigue, and guilt instead of progress. The truth is simple. Forcing more hours doesn't guarantee meaningful results. It just guarantees exhaustion. This problem is only sharper in 2025. The majority of remote-capable workers now spend at least part of their time working from home. Flexibility sounded ideal, but it also blurred the boundaries between office and personal life. Work spreads into the living room, into dinner, even into bed, until there's no real off switch. That constant presence of work erodes motivation because the brain never has time to step away and recharge. At the same time, technology makes attention harder to protect. Between email pings, AI reminders, and endless engineered-for micro-interruptions, the average person checks their phone roughly 96 times a day. Each glance splits attention, making it harder to finish even simple tasks without falling into a jumble of half-started work. So what happens is clear. We're busier than ever, juggling more apps, more messages, and more meetings, yet productivity per person stays flat. The endless hustle doesn't translate into more valuable output. Instead, it multiplies distractions and undermines energy. Hustle culture asks people to fight their own biology, ignoring fatigue, overriding attention cycles, treating themselves like machines. But humans don't run on brute force. When you resist your natural rhythms, tasks feel heavier, progress slows, and work becomes something to survive, rather than something that carries you forward. That is why a new approach matters now. If trying to power through only leads to burnout, then the alternative must be to align with how the mind already works. Productivity stops being a punishment when you stop battling distraction and start reshaping the environment around it. The goal isn't lowering your standards or abandoning ambition. It's redesigning the frame so your brain doesn't waste energy fighting itself. That shift opens the door to strategies that redirect effort instead of multiplying it. Approaches tested in research and tailored for how we actually live today. And this is where things start to change. The old model gave us exhaustion packaged as achievement, but a different path offers something more sustainable. Clearer focus, less friction, and a sense that progress flows instead of dragging. The first step toward that path is learning how to look at your goals in a way that highlights not just what you want, but also what stands in the way. That shift is where real momentum begins. Shift number 1, mental contrasting, seeing the gap clearly. Shift number 1 is called mental contrasting, and it's all about seeing the gap between where you are now and the future you want. Most people think goal setting is just about picturing success, imagining the dream job, the fit body, or the new business. But here's the problem. If you only visualize the finish line, your brain can actually trick you into feeling like you've already achieved something, giving you a burst of satisfaction, but no reason to act. That's why positive visualization on its own often backfires. It produces comfort, not momentum. Mental contrasting balances that. You still take a moment to imagine the best version of the future, but then you immediately ask, what's standing in the way right now? By holding both pictures, the dream and the obstacle, your mind starts building a natural bridge between them. The gap creates useful tension, and in psychology, that tension fuels consistent action. Without it, goals remain abstract. With it, the gap itself becomes a spark for problem solving. Here's a simple example. Say your goal is to exercise 3 times a week. Step 1, imagine the results you want: the strength, the energy, the satisfaction. Step 2, identify the obstacle. Maybe every evening you're too drained to make it to the gym. Now the gap is clear, the goal exists, but so does a predictable roadblock. Suddenly, tangible options appear. Moving workouts to the morning, pairing them with a daily routine, or even keeping equipment in your living space to remove friction. Visualization alone wouldn't have done that. Adding contrast did. This method isn't just intuition, it's tested. Mental contrasting forms the foundation of the MCI approach when paired with if-then planning, what researchers call implementation intentions. Studies, including a 2025 trial by Devine and Astill, show that combining visualization with specific action scripts accelerates habit formation. In fact, their findings suggest that when people used both strategies together, habits took root in as little as 3 weeks, much faster than visualization or planning alone. This research demonstrates that mental contrasting doesn't weaken dreams, it strengthens them by binding aspirations to real, immediate choices. One of the reasons it's so powerful today is how it cuts through distractions that quietly erode progress. Without contrast, endless social media scrolling or checking notifications looks harmless. It feels like background noise. With contrast, those habits jump into the frame as the specific barriers stealing time from your goals. Instead of blaming yourself for being lazy, you can point directly to the obstacle and create a counterstep. The obstacle stops being an excuse. It turns into a trigger for action. So here's a short practice for you right now. Pause the video for 30 seconds. Picture one meaningful goal you want to reach this year. Make it specific, something that matters to you. Then name one concrete obstacle you know will block the way. That's it. Don't overthink it. By pairing your vision with a real barrier, you've begun the process of mental contrasting. It's small, but repeating it builds the reflex to connect dreams with steps automatically. This first shift is about seeing clearly, keeping your future in view, but also keeping your present honest. Visualization feels inspiring, but contrast turns inspiration into a plan. And when the plan is tied to real-life situations instead of vague motivation, it anchors effort where it matters most. Now, once you've identified the gap between your goals and your everyday challenges, the next question is, how do you actually follow through when the obstacle shows up? That's where the second shift comes in, because knowing the barrier is one thing, but training your brain to respond predictably when it appears takes things to another level. Shift number 2, implementation intentions, the if-then formula that works. Shift number 2 is called implementation intentions, better known as the if-then formula, and it's one of the simplest but most powerful tools for making action automatic. Think about it this way. Computers don't sit around debating whether to run a command. A line of code is triggered, and the system executes. Humans, on the other hand, stall out constantly. You open your laptop to write, but 15 minutes later, you're still scrolling headlines. That hesitation is like a system crash. Implementation intentions basically write your mental code in advance, so when a situation pops up, the response runs automatically. Here's the core idea. Instead of leaving things vague, you link a clear condition to a clear action. If I open my laptop at 9 a.m., then I will write a 250-word draft before checking email. It's short, obvious, and precise. With that one line, you remove the messy menu of choices that normally eats up energy. You're no longer asking yourself what to start with or whether to delay. The condition arrives, the laptop opens at 9, and the response kicks in. The rule handles the moment so you don't have to. What makes these rules effective is how they reduce decision fatigue. Every small choice, what to do now, where to start, which tab to open, costs willpower. Since attention is already under attack from endless notifications, we can't afford to waste energy on constant hesitation. If-then plans cut through that overhead. They take the choice out of the moment and shift the brain towards simple execution instead of endless deliberation. That's why people who use them often describe feeling lighter when starting tasks. The heavy lifting gets done once, at the planning stage, instead of every time the situation repeats. Let's put this into practice with distraction itself. In 2025, half a dozen apps are competing for your attention at any given second. Resisting each one manually is exhausting. A small script like, if I open Instagram, then I'll set a 5-minute timer, transforms the entire interaction. Instead of losing an hour without noticing, you contain it to a defined break. The app isn't banned outright, but you've planted a boundary that runs by default. The exact same trick works with email. If I check my inbox, then I process it for 10 minutes only after finishing my top task. These may sound trivial, but repeated enough, they shift whether a day drifts away or stays intact. The same system applies to larger goals like building healthier routines. Telling yourself, "I'll try to exercise today," creates dozens of chances to negotiate. Link it instead. If I get home from work, then I immediately change into running shoes. That one sentence pulls the action closer to automatic. You're not relying on mood, motivation, or guilt at the end of the day. The arrival of the situation automatically cues the next step. Over time, the loop becomes ingrained, and the obstacle, the exhausted feeling after work, loses its ability to derail you. Research backs this up strongly. Studies have reported substantial uplifts when people use if-then planning compared to those who just set broad goals. In one case, participants who built implementation intentions into their study routines completed roughly 60% more practice questions under certain conditions. That particular number comes with context. But the trend holds. Scripting the link between situation and action consistently improves follow-through. More importantly, newer findings show that combining these scripts with imagery makes them even more effective. Devine and Astill's 2025 study found that reinforcing implementation intentions with vivid mental imagery accelerated habit strength. Behavior changes began as early as week 2, and measurable gains in habit strength appeared by week 3. That's a useful marker. Real changes in routine don't always take months. With the right pairing of imagery and if-then scripts, steady progress can happen much sooner. Another advantage is that these rules don't only apply to outward behavior, they work for thoughts as well. For example, if I catch myself spiraling into negative self-talk, then I'll write down the very next step I can take. That one swap directs energy away from unproductive rumination and toward action. It's not that hesitation or negativity disappears, but instead of lingering, you're routed quickly into forward motion. Again, the outcome isn't about brute force, but about redirection. The structure keeps energy preserved by cutting out unhelpful loops. Over time, these scripts build into a mental operating system. Imagine stacking them across common friction points. If I pour morning coffee, then I open my planner. If I close my laptop, then I list tomorrow's top 3 tasks. If it's 3 p.m. and I feel sluggish, then I step outside for 5 minutes. On their own, these may appear small, but layering them gradually removes dozens of slow leaks from your day. Instead of effort draining away at every decision, momentum builds because your default settings nudge you into productive cycles automatically. That shift matters more than ever because modern life guarantees distraction. No one has the bandwidth to fight off hundreds of nudges from devices every day using willpower alone. With implementation intentions, the expectation changes. It's not about being strong enough in the moment, but about being scripted beforehand. Energy gets conserved for tasks that actually matter. The more you practice these rules, the more natural they feel, until acting on them requires no more conscious thought than putting on a seatbelt when you get into a car. Here's a quick experiment you can try immediately. Pick one habit you've been putting off, something specific you care about but struggle to do regularly. Write down a single if-then rule, linking it to a moment that already occurs in your daily routine. Don't overcomplicate it. Choose a clear condition you know will happen and attach one small action. Post it in the comments if you want. It'll cement the idea and give you a reference point. Even better, you'll see how many other people are using the formula in creative ways. The act of naming it clearly makes the intention stronger. This approach demonstrates something critical about productivity. You don't need to wrestle against distraction or summon unlimited willpower. You just need to reduce the number of moments that require them in the first place. With implementation intentions, every potential stall point becomes a point of automatic motion instead. The shift is simple, almost mechanical, but its impact compounds fast. By anchoring actions to situations, you stop hoping you'll have the discipline to start. You've already made the call. And yet, even with these rules in place, one challenge still lingers. Introducing brand new habits into your life tends to work for a while and then collapse. That's because standing up a behavior completely from scratch doesn't stick easily, even with the best planning. The next shift shows a smarter alternative, one that uses rhythms you already live by to anchor new actions so they actually last. Shift number 3, habit stacking, the Trojan horse of behavior change. Shift 3 is called habit stacking, and it works by attaching a new behavior to a habit you already do every day. You're not broken or undisciplined for struggling to maintain habits. The real issue is that most of us try to bolt new actions onto our lives without giving them stable anchors. Imagine trying to stack a brick on loose sand. That's how most habits fail when they float in isolation. Habit stacking changes that by letting your existing routines do the heavy lifting, so a new action feels less like a separate chore and more like a natural extension of what you already do. The principle is simple. Link something consistent to something you want. For example, brushing your teeth happens almost without thought. If you add, after brushing my teeth, I will floss, the first action becomes the trigger for the second. Over time, the two feel inseparable, and flossing stops being a battle of motivation. This is what James Clear popularized in Atomic Habits, and it lines up with what behavioral scientists recommend. Use the cues already hardwired into daily life so new routines form with less resistance. Research on habit formation supports the same idea. A key study by Lally et al. Found that on average, habits require around 666 days of repetition to become automatic. That's much longer than most people expect, which explains why abandoned habits feel like personal failure. They weren't failing at motivation, they just lacked a consistent anchor and enough time. But here's the good news. While science shows habits often need weeks to stick, new research suggests that combining methods speeds up the process. Remember Devine and Astill's 2025 study? They found that pairing imagery with implementation intentions accelerated habit strength, with early changes emerging within 3 weeks. That doesn't mean you bypass the requirement for repetition, but it does highlight that using anchors plus supportive techniques gives you an advantage. The stacking method isn't quick magic, it's reliable scaffolding. It uses what's already stable to hold up what's still fragile. Take coffee as an example, since most adults already have that built into their mornings. Instead of trying to will yourself into a new habit out of thin air, you could say, after I brew my coffee, I will write down my top 3 goals for the day. Coffee is inevitable. The action attached to it rides the routine. That's far easier to remember and reinforce than just hoping you'll find time to list your goals at some random point during the morning rush. One common mistake with habit formation is treating each routine as a separate island, when in reality the brain remembers sequences far more effectively than scattered tasks. This works for other essential habits too. Let's say you want to meditate but never find the right moment. You could attach, after I brush my teeth at night, I'll sit on the edge of my bed and take 3 slow breaths. That's the smallest version of meditation, 3 breaths, which lowers resistance so much that starting feels nearly effortless. Over weeks, those 3 breaths can grow into a 2-minute habit and eventually something more substantial. But the anchor remains constant. By linking small actions to recurring cues, you eliminate the friction of choosing when and how to begin. And that's key. Friction slows momentum more than lack of motivation does. When a new routine requires you to figure out timing, environment, or reminders, it dies quickly. Anchors bypass all that. They give the behavior a clean runway to take off, same time, same place, same trigger. That's why habit stacking is often called a Trojan horse for change. It sneaks productive steps into spaces that already happen automatically. Over time, actions bundled together begin to feel like one unit, rather than separate challenges. Habit stacking can also scale upward from one small action into a chain of routines. For example, after I close my laptop in the evening, I'll write tomorrow's priorities. Once that's automatic, you can add, after writing priorities, I'll make a cup of tea. And later, after finishing tea, I'll read 2 pages of a book. Each layer strengthens the chain, and the result is an evening ritual that grows naturally from one anchor instead of forcing 3 new habits into empty space. Trying to create all of them at once would likely collapse under the weight of decision fatigue. But stacked sequences reinforce themselves with every link. This structure matters more than ever in 2025, when distractions eat away at focus from every direction. A brand new habit dropped into a crowded digital landscape has almost no chance of surviving. If it doesn't have stability, it gets buried under notifications, emails, or messages demanding attention. Anchoring cuts through all of that. The smell of brewing coffee or the action of shutting a laptop is a stronger, more reliable cue than any push notification. These naturally occurring reminders are built into your daily rhythm in a way that devices will never replicate. There's also a psychological benefit. Adding one more step to something familiar feels far less intimidating than trying to start fresh. Flossing after brushing doesn't seem like much. It's just an extension of what already happens. Writing goals while sipping coffee isn't a heavy demand. It's just a slight stretch of a familiar comfort. This framing lowers the mental weight, and reduced weight means higher follow-through. At that point, the question of discipline shrinks, because you're not forcing change against resistance. You're guiding it along existing grooves. Over time, these stacked habits form scaffolds that support not just individual goals, but full systems. Think of them as networks rather than isolated actions. Missing a habit one day doesn't destroy the system, because the anchor habit, coffee, brushing, laptop shutdown, doesn't go anywhere. The opportunity to restart comes with the next cycle, rebuilt on solid ground. That resilience is why habit stacking succeeds where resolutions usually fail. It doesn't rely on bursts of motivation, it leans on stability and repetition until the new behavior feels natural. So here's a direct practice. Pick one anchor you already do every day without fail. It could be boiling water for tea, switching off your alarm, or locking the door when you leave the house. Attach a tiny new habit onto that action. Maybe it's, after I pour my tea, I'll write one sentence in my journal. Or, after I switch off my alarm, I'll do 10 push-ups. Don't overreach. Choose one anchor and stick with one attached behavior for the next 7 days. If you want extra accountability, post your anchor cue in the comments. Seeing others' examples may give you ideas and help reinforce your own. The Trojan horse of behavior change isn't about radical reinvention. It's about making small adjustments in places that feel almost invisible until they become automatic. Anchoring new habits to old ones is the difference between intentions that fade and systems that endure. Once this structure is in place, it stops being about motivation because your environment runs the rep sequence on its own. And that raises a bigger question about sustainability. Even if you attach habits wisely, what happens on days when you feel depleted? Anchors solve structure, but they don't solve the deeper challenge of dwindling energy. To keep consistent action alive in the long run, you need to understand how your body and mind manage their fuel. Because it's not about squeezing more hours into the day, but about protecting the energy you already have. Shift number 4, energy management over time management. Shift number 4 is energy management over time management, and this is where many productivity systems go wrong. Most people believe that if they could just find more hours, they'd finally get ahead. But you've probably experienced the truth firsthand. Staring at a screen with hours available doesn't mean work gets done if your body and brain are running empty. The problem usually isn't a shortage of time. It's that energy fluctuates, and those fluctuations determine how effective each hour feels. One high-energy hour can outproduce 3 low-energy ones, which is why logging extra time doesn't always move projects forward. The first key point here is understanding where time-based planning falls short. Traditional schedules treat every hour like a neutral unit, as if 9 in the morning carries the same value as 9 in the evening. Biology proves otherwise. Decision fatigue builds silently throughout the day. Every small choice, from responding to emails to deciding what to eat, costs a bit of mental fuel. By mid-afternoon, even if the clock gives you more hours, your focus has already thinned out. That's not laziness, it's depletion. And pushing harder in that state rarely delivers equal returns. What improves productivity isn't stacking endless hours, but aligning work with energy peaks and protecting recovery before exhaustion undermines output. The second point comes directly from physiology. We all operate on ultradian rhythms. cycles of about 90 to 120 minutes, where energy naturally rises, crests, and then dips. This is different from circadian rhythms, which cover your 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. Within the day, ultradian patterns explain why concentration feels sharp for about an hour and a half, then drifts. Ignoring these cycles creates the illusion of lost discipline, when in fact it's biology telling you to reset. In workplace research updated in 2025, this link between ultradian cycles and what's called biological prime time has been emphasized as one of the most reliable signals for when to block deep work. Biological prime time refers to the window in which your individual energy peaks. It's the point when you're sharpest, when working on your toughest task feels natural and carries the highest return. Everyone has a unique curve, some peak mid-morning, some late evening. Identifying that window is far more valuable than packing more hours around it.